November hours. The River Lys, near the village of Neuchâtel. The armored regiment of the Waffen-SS Panzer Division Hitlermarsch had prepared an unassailable kill zone. The broken, forgotten weapon that arrived with the reconnaissance unit that morning was the Allies' only chance against the concrete fortified positions. The SS called it the paper tube of the Americans due to its unreliable appearance. But the men who carried it would soon discover its unique, terrifying power to turn concrete fortifications into mass graves. The strategic crossroads at Neuchâtel, nestled along the heavily fortified River Lys sector, had become the hinge of the autumn campaign. For the Allied Timberwolf Division, advancing toward the German border had stalled against a masterpiece of defense designed by SS Brigadeführer Heinz. Heinz, a veteran of the Eastern Front's defensive meat grinder, had learned the bitter lesson of mobile warfare: Americans could not be stopped in the open. They had to be trapped. In direct contradiction to standard German doctrine, Heinz ordered us to abandon static trench lines. Instead, he engineered a network of interlocking fire blocks, 14 heavily reinforced concrete bunkers, each with walls up to thick, arranged in a checkerboard pattern along a narrow, waterlogged flood plain. The only access was across open ground, perfectly sighted for machine gun crossfire. At the core of the defense, hidden beneath a disused farmhouse, was the main command post and medical bay, secured by enough reinforced masonry to withstand a direct hit from artillery. Allied assault tactics, which had worked reliably since the Normandy breakthrough, were proving catastrophic. Artillery bombardments, effective against earthworks, merely chipped the paint on the fire blocks. Tank guns from the accompanying Shermans lacked the punch to pierce the thick ferroconcrete at range. Frontal infantry assaults, relying on satchel charges and flamethrowers, were neutralized before they reached of the objective. The SS had built their firing apertures narrow and angled, preventing the entry of portable weapons. A week of determined fighting had resulted in over Allied casualties and zero ground gained. The commander, frustrated and bleeding manpower, needed a miracle. Intelligence reports from a captured engineer confirmed Heinz's revolutionary conclusion: the defense had calculated for every American weapon currently deployed, heavy artillery, tank guns, and portable infantry weapons. They had created a fortress that was functionally unassailable. The Japanese at Saipan had proven static defense was costly. Heinz had proven that concrete and terrain could defeat overwhelming firepower. The only weapon the SS hadn't accounted for was one the Americans themselves considered a transitional failure: the new, temperamental. The weapon brought to the front by a small group of reconnaissance engineers wasn't even formally designated for anti-fortification use. It was the T anti-tank launcher, nicknamed the Dragon's Tooth by the Ordnance Corps due to its oversized, oddly shaped warhead and notorious recoil. It was fragile, the ignition system routinely failed in damp weather, and its accuracy beyond was a joke. The SS troops, observing American training films, saw their own soldiers laugh at its cumbersome nature. They considered it a sign of desperation. But the T carried one technical secret that the standard-issue anti-tank rounds lacked: the hollow-charge kinetic impact payload. Developed initially by a metallurgical team at the Detroit Arsenal, the warhead housed a shaped charge that, upon contact, detonated a lining of copper, focusing the explosion into a hypervelocity jet of superplasticized metal. The design maximized pressure at the point of impact, creating a tiny, intense, localized breach. Crucially, the engineers at the, specifically a resourceful Captain Vance, with a background in structural engineering, realized the potential of this flaw. The blast was too small to destroy the bunker, but its specialized nature meant it wasn't trying to destroy the wall. It was trying to punch a needle-thin hole. Vance's team focused their innovation not on the launcher itself, but on the ammunition. They increased the copper lining density and, against all official warnings, slightly destabilized the explosive filler, ensuring a wider internal pressure wave post-penetration. Their plan was radical and defied 3 years of demolition doctrine. They wouldn't attempt to destroy the fire blocks. They would exploit the one vulnerability all modern concrete structures share: internal air pressure. The T's jet could penetrate the wall, creating a clean breach. Through this breach, they would immediately insert a new invention: the compression tube, a simple, spring-loaded piston device loaded with a high-yield white phosphorus charge and a secondary concussion grenade. The theory was devastating. The T-round creates the hole, the compression tube is inserted and fired. The resulting blast and intense heat, contained within the sealed concrete bunker, would instantly overpressurize the chamber. Even if the SS troops survived the initial blast, the rapid pressure spike and immediate oxygen depletion would render the position instantly non-viable. The SS had calculated for external explosions and fire, but not a catastrophic, instantaneous internal rupture. The paper tube was about to become the dragon's tooth. November hours. Fire block Delta 6. The deployment was slow, agonizingly precise, and required a complete reversal of standard operating procedure. The infantry did not assault, they acted as specialized spotters, identifying blind spots between the SS machine gun arcs. A two-man T-team, led by Sergeant Kendrick, advanced under smoke cover to a distance where the SS felt safe and the T was still marginally accurate. The first shot was a near miss, impacting the earth, causing the weapon's notoriously dangerous ignition delay. The SS position briefly ceased fire, the garrison inside likely laughing at the weapon's failure. Kendrick's second shot, a minute later, was perfect. It struck the face of Delta 6, precisely where the concrete was thickest. There was no huge, satisfying explosion. Just a sharp thwack, and a tiny puff of dust. The SS unit commander inside radioed a brief, mocking report, enemy firing flares from paper tubes. No damage. Resume fire. But Kendrick's team was already moving. The second man, Private Harris, sprinted forward with the compression tube. He located the clean, puncture, a needle in a concrete haystack, and plunged the tube in, the spring mechanism setting the charge deep. A half-second later, the silence was shattered by a muffled, inward imploding boom. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The thick walls shuddered. Smoke, thick and white from the phosphorus, shot out of every firing aperture, every seam, and every microscopic crack in the concrete. The roof of the bunker visibly bulged an inch and settled. When the clearing team cautiously approached, they found all of Delta 6 dead. They weren't killed by shrapnel or direct heat. Autopsies later confirmed massive internal trauma caused by the sudden, intense pressure spike. Their position, designed to be impregnable from the outside, had been turned into a pressurized death chamber from the inside. Over the next, Kendrick's teams, working under the cover of a sustained artillery barrage to mask the sound of the T, systematically reduced of the fire blocks. The SS radios, initially mocking the paper tubes, turned frantic. Messages intercepted by Allied intelligence documented the descent into panic. Delta 6 silenced, no sign of external fire, request explanation. Followed by, the tubes are killing us. They make the walls collapse inside. The enemy believed the Americans possessed a geological weapon, not a simple shaped charge. The psychological breakdown was complete. The defense, built on the faith of concrete, was collapsing from within. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The localized collapse of the fire blocks sent immediate shockwaves through the SS command structure. Brigadefuhrer Heinz, secure below the ground, initially dismissed the reports from the field as the panic of junior officers. His defensive geometry was mathematically perfect, the positions were impossible to neutralize without heavy siege weapons. But as the radio intercepts grew frantic and then fell silent, one fire block after another, Heinz was forced to confront the reality that his unassailable fortress was dissolving. On November, a field patrol recovered the bodies of the Delta 6 garrison. The inspection revealed the surgical, small entry point and the grotesque internal injuries. Heinz's engineers, stunned, realized the Americans hadn't used a bigger gun, they had used a smarter, smaller one. The captured Japanese doctrine on the effectiveness of portable flamethrowers had influenced their design, but the assumption was that the enemy would require large access points. They had never considered a weapon that created its own micro-breach and then exploited the environment of the bunker itself. Heinz's command post was meant to withstand anything but a direct airstrike. His defensive order, dubbed Stahlgeist, Steel Spirit, dictated that the forward units must hold at all costs, forcing the Americans to bleed out. However, the psychological mechanism of defeat was far swifter than the physical. The remaining 2 forward fire blocks were abandoned not because they were hit, but at the report of Sergeant Kendrick's teams advancing. Unprecedentedly, SS troops, believing they faced an unstoppable internal explosion device, fled their positions, abandoning supplies and weapons, a complete breakdown of the rigid SS warrior code. The division's intelligence section, monitoring the captured radio bands, documented this cascade collapse in morale. Interrogations of the few prisoners confirmed the fear. They referred to the T not as the paper tube but as the shatterer or the whisper of death, because the attack was often silent, just a small thwack, followed by the sudden, terrifying internal boom. For the first time on this front, SS troops were choosing capture over remaining in their prepared, concrete defenses. Heinz, seeing his defensive masterpiece turn into a trap, was cornered. His command post had become a liability. On November, he radioed the Panzer HQ for permission to execute a withdrawal, an act that violated his core orders. The request was denied. His final decision, documented in a recovered field note, was a desperate, doomed attempt to counterattack. Heinz and his remaining attempted a final, suicidal breakout from their underground lair, hoping to destroy the T teams before they could target the command post's vulnerable ventilation shaft. The successful neutralization of the fire blocks led to immediate battlefield modifications and the establishment of new doctrine. Captain Vance's reconnaissance engineers, now designated the Assault Pioneer Platoon, were no longer just supporting infantry, they were the spearhead. Their tactics evolved quickly, mirroring the systematic precision that defined American industrial warfare. The SS command post, located beneath the farmhouse, presented a new, deeper challenge. The concrete was thicker, and the entrance tunnel was angled and heavily protected. The engineers determined a frontal assault was unnecessary and too risky. They developed the seismic triangulation technique, utilizing rudimentary ground vibration detectors, originally designed for oil exploration, to map the underground tunnel system. This gave Kendrick's teams 3-dimensional targeting data. The new approach focused not on the walls, but on the ventilation shafts. SS designers had located these shafts in seemingly innocuous spots, beneath a large oak tree and disguised as a chimney, believing their small size protected them from all but a direct artillery hit. The T was employed at an extended range with Sergeant Kendrick's team refining the launch angle. Their target was not to penetrate the shaft's small concrete cap, but to obliterate the cap and open the shaft for a secondary attack. The shot hit. The reports documented the effect: the cap disintegrated, opening a vertical hole. Instead of the compression tube, they had developed a scaled-down delivery system, a thermal gas canister. This canister, dropped down the shaft, released a superheated, rapidly expanding cloud of dense thermal gas designed to immediately consume oxygen and paralyze any personnel in the confined space. This final maneuver was swift and decisive. Reports showed smoke and gas emerging from dozens of previously unidentified exits, confirming the full extent of Heinz's deep tunnel system. The after-action report documented the neutralization of the command post after the target acquisition. Heinz's final, desperate breakout attempt was cut short by the gas attack, trapping his small force underground. The only casualties they sustained during this operation were 2 soldiers wounded by stray small arms fire from the initial suppression phase. The result was a complete, systematic destruction of a defense that had previously cost lives, achieved with minimal risk. The forgotten, fragile T had transformed static defense into a death sentence. The tactical success of the T teams was only half the story. The true triumph lay in the industrial and logistical support that sustained the operation. The original inspirational video focused on napalm fuel, and here, our focus shifts to specialized precision munitions. The T was designed to be disposable, but its modified ammunition, the copper-lined, hollow-charge rounds, were a high-demand, low-supply item. Each round required specialized materials and meticulous assembly at a regional ordnance depot far behind the lines. The munitions resupply platoon, the unsung heroes, developed a sophisticated, rapid supply chain management system based on constant battlefield feedback. They didn't just move boxes, they managed a chemical process. Initial problems included the rounds being too sensitive to altitude changes during transport, which destabilized the explosive filler. The solution, implemented within of the first successful breach, involved shipping the rounds in specialized, pressure-regulated containers, requiring dedicated transport trucks and priority clearance on congested roads. Furthermore, the compression tubes and thermal gas canisters were developed and manufactured almost entirely in the field. Vance's engineers utilized captured German metalworking lathes and repurposed parts from damaged vehicles to fabricate the complex piston and spring mechanisms. This was industrial adaptability at its finest, a microfactory established within of the front line, constantly refining the weapon's necessary secondary tools. Military records trace the direct lineage of this logistical innovation, the ability to rapidly produce and deploy highly specialized munitions for niche tactical problems. The Japanese had faced America's overwhelming industrial capacity in the form of tanks and planes. Heinz faced it in the form of precision, localized engineering and logistics. A single fireblock might consume T rounds and compression tubes. Sustaining the systematic reduction of the entire sector required thousands of these specialized, handmade items. Post-war analysis confirmed that the SS supply chain, based on centralized production and slow, rigid delivery, could not match this American localized industrial response. Heinz's defensive genius was negated not by the power of the initial shot, but by the guarantee that the shot would arrive exactly when and where the infantry needed it, perfectly calibrated for the target. The victory belonged to the planners and the truck drivers as much as the gunners. The psychological impact of the T and the compression tube on the SS defenders was profound, extending far beyond the physical trauma. It was a weapon of architectural betrayal. For the SS troops, their faith rested in the thick, cold concrete that promised invulnerability. The T didn't just defeat them, it turned their sanctuary into an inescapable coffin. Post-war interrogations of the surviving SS soldiers revealed a persistent sense of disbelief and terror. One survivor testified that facing artillery was war, as we understood it. You hear the shell, you hide, you survive. But the T was different, you hear a tap, and then the air itself tries to kill you. The wall, your friend, becomes the enemy. The weapon contradicted their entire concept of military service and survival. This led to the unprecedented surrenders. In previous engagements, SS units were known to fight to the last man. At the River Lys, they were a direct result of the psychological defeat, confirming the American intelligence assessment that SS units were choosing preservation over death when faced with the internal collapse mechanism. For the American troops who operated the weapon, the experience carried a unique moral burden. Military chaplain reports documented increased requests for counseling from Sergeant Kendrick's teams. Unlike artillery fire or conventional tank combat, the T operation was intimate and surgical. The crew knew they were effectively sealing men alive within a confined space. This duality, the knowledge that the weapon saved countless American lives while inflicting a terrifying, inescapable death, created a moral complexity that haunted the gunners long after the war. The after-action review acknowledged the moral ambiguity. The weapon system was decisive in reducing casualties on our side, but the nature of the kill was deeply distressing to the personnel involved. This psychological cost must be factored into future doctrinal development. The legacy of the T at Neuchâtel was therefore not just a tactical footnote but a lesson in psychological warfare. The Germans had designed a defense based on physical strength, the Americans defeated it by developing a weapon that destroyed the defender's mental fortitude, the belief that any place was safe from American technology. The ridiculed paper tube had become the symbol of technological dominance that rendered courage meaningless. The battle for Neuchâtel ended on November, after 6 days of combat following the T's deployment. The immediate lessons learned were integrated into the Allied advance across Europe. The T, previously destined for obsolescence, was immediately prioritized for production, with the hollow charge round becoming standard issue for anti-fortification teams. The assault pioneer platoon's seismic triangulation technique became a mandatory subject in engineering schools. The strategic consequences were massive. The breakthrough at Neuchâtel eliminated the hinge of the German defense on the River Lys, allowing them to advance in the following week, shortening the campaign in that sector by months. Joint Allied estimates indicated that the T and its modified tactics prevented potentially thousands of Allied casualties, based on the initial expected loss ratio of per position. The General Staff's post-war assessment of the operation concluded that the T demonstrated a fundamental truth of industrial age warfare: technological adaptability multiplied by logistical precision equals victory, regardless of human courage. Heinz's men possessed the courage, but they could not overcome the small, localized industrial machine that manufactured, delivered, and innovated the perfect counter-weapon in real time. Today, the fields near Neuchâtel, now returned to their French name Neufchâteau, remain quiet. The concrete fire blocks, deemed too costly to dismantle, stand as permanent, scarred monuments. Some still show the tiny, perfect holes, testimony to the moment a seemingly broken, derided weapon fired a surgical shot that turned an unassailable fortress into a pressurized tomb. The story of the T serves as a counterpoint to the more famous weapons of the war. It was not the biggest or loudest weapon, but the one that was most adaptable. The SS believed their walls were the strongest in Europe. They discovered that when technology flows through tunnels like water or exploits the physics of confined space, all positional advantage is negated. The victory at the River Lys confirmed that in the face of relentless American industrial ingenuity, warrior spirit alone was not enough. The extensive documentation regarding the T and the Neuchâtel operation now resides within the National Archives, providing a complete picture of how a transitional, often ridiculed weapon became a decisive force. War diaries from the division, after-action reports, and technical assessments provide detailed operational records that highlight the T's unique success. The Marine Corps' official history credits the flame-throwing tank as the significant innovation of the Pacific. For the European theater's breakthrough battles, military historians now recognize the hollow charge anti-fortification doctrine as the key technical innovation that fundamentally altered infantry versus bunker tactics. Crucially, the identity of the inventor of the decisive tactical element, the compression tube, was almost lost to history. While the T was a standard ordnance project, the rapid, field-expedient modification that made it lethal was the brainchild of Captain Vance, the structural engineer mentioned earlier. Post-war testimony from Sergeant Kendrick confirmed Vance's relentless drive. Vance recognized that engineering was not about brute force, but about exploiting weaknesses in materials, the tiny crack, the vulnerable air pocket. Vance's philosophy, documented in a single surviving technical journal, was simple: the enemy builds a structure to fight our artillery, they forget that the structure itself becomes a sealed container for whatever we put inside. We just needed a specialized needle and a fast way to deliver the poison. Vance's innovation was later applied to urban warfare tactics and subsequent operations, proving that the principles developed on the muddy River Lys were universally applicable to sealed fortifications. The U.S. Army had established specialized target exploitation units based entirely on the assault pioneer platoon's experience, focusing on precision penetration and internal defeat rather than external destruction. The story of the T is a stark reminder that decisive innovations don't always emerge from massive, costly projects. Sometimes, victory hinges on an underappreciated expert, a structural engineer thrust into combat, who finds the vulnerability that brute force misses. The fact that the SS troops mocked the T as the paper tube only amplified the psychological victory achieved by Vance's ingenious adaptation. The ridicule became the ultimate proof of their tragic underestimation of American ingenuity. Brigadefuhrer Heinz's final, desperate attempt to counterattack ended in chaos. His small force was neutralized, trapped by the thermal gas deployed into the command post's ventilation system. Heinz himself was among those killed, his body found within the reinforced chamber, a testament to his faith in concrete being tragically misplaced. The German military assessment of the battle, documented in captured high command reports recovered during the subsequent Rhineland campaign, confirmed the decisive role of the T and its modified ammunition. Unlike the denials and rigid adherence to doctrines seen in other sectors, the intelligence officers analyzing the River Lys collapse provided a chillingly honest appraisal. One report, penned by a field marshal's aide, contained a stark acknowledgement: the Americans did not invent a bigger shell, they invented a smarter shell. They turned our best defense against us. Our concrete was our shield, their technology made it a coffin. The T negated our entire defensive strategy. This reality influenced defensive planning throughout the rest of the German campaign. Commanders were ordered to create lighter, more dispersed defenses that could be abandoned quickly, rather than investing massive resources into thick, static bunkers. The lesson was learned too late. When faced with American industrial-level adaptability, material strength was temporary. The SS had prepared for 3 years of conventional assault tactics. They had studied the tank assaults of the British and the massive artillery barrages of the Soviets. But they had not anticipated a weapon that operated on the principles of physics and material science rather than sheer explosive force. The ridicule they initially held for the paper tube became a bitter epitaph for the men who died believing in the power of their walls. Annual military history symposiums often revisit the Neuchâtel scenario. The consensus is clear: the SS defenders possessed determination and courage, but the equation of modern war was immutable. The American ability to recognize a flaw in their own equipment, the T's low accuracy, and transform it into a decisive advantage through field-level innovation, the compression tube, proved the overwhelming factor. The German reliance on fixed defense was defeated by the fluid, innovative nature of the American war machine. The SS died not from a blunder, but from an impossible technological disadvantage. The story of the T at Neuchâtel established a clear legacy. The weapon system was a decisive innovation that both saved thousands of American lives and inflicted a form of death that inspired terror and broke the will of the enemy. Admiral Chester Nimitz, referencing similar logistical and technical breakthroughs in the Pacific, noted in a later report, "Victory is often achieved not by the largest weapons, but by the most perfectly tailored ones." The speed with which the Army tailored their anti-fortification weapon at Neuchâtel was equivalent to a full division's deployment. General Omar Bradley, reflecting on the lessons learned, emphasized the core concept of adaptability. The courage of the German soldier was never in doubt. But courage cannot defeat chemistry, and determination cannot defeat an engineer who has found a fundamental flaw in your design. They relied on fixed material, we relied on continuous innovation. The moral duality of the weapon persists. Veterans' reunions, documented by military historians, have seen American soldiers express respect for the unwavering courage of the SS defenders, even as they defended the use of the T as a painful necessity. The weapon created an immediate, inescapable death, but it ultimately shortened the brutal campaign. The T proved a fundamental truth of industrial-age conflict: technological superiority could overcome human courage and determination when the disparity became overwhelming, especially in niche tactical applications. The few SS survivors who eventually returned home carried the invisible scar of this defeat, the realization that their rigid faith in their Führer and their fortifications was no match for the ingenuity of a handful of American engineers and the limitless capacity of the American supply chain that fed them. Today, while the T is a museum piece, its lineage is clear. Modern military doctrine for assaulting fortified positions still references the principles established by Vance's team: precision penetration, followed by internal atmospheric or chemical defeat. The broken, ridiculed weapon that fired the shot that killed them all stands as a permanent testament to the fact that in modern warfare, the most fearsome weapon is not the one that makes the largest explosion, but the one that targets the enemy's foundational belief in its own safety. The battle for the River Lys at Neuchâtel concluded not just with a tactical victory, but with a profound statement on the nature of century warfare. Of the SS defenders commanded by Heinz, only surrendered, all of them fleeing the advancing T teams rather than remaining in the bunkers. The majority died when their impregnable fortifications became airtight, inescapable pressure chambers. American forces, after the initial week of high casualties, saw their casualty rate plummet to near zero during the main assault on the fireblocks. The transformation was complete, from faith in frontal assault to the recognition that technology could negate any positional advantage. The story of the T encapsulates the American war machine's decisive advantage: adaptability. It was a victory achieved not by a tank or a strategic bomber, but by a field-level innovation, a device, the compression tube, paired with a round. This small-scale ingenuity, backed by a world-beating industrial supply chain, proved the ultimate force multiplier. The Germans relied on fixed blueprints and rigid doctrine. The Americans relied on structural engineers like Vance, who could turn a flawed weapon into a surgical instrument of war. The SS ridiculed the T, confident that their concrete would stop any projectile. They failed to realize that the projectile only needed to be smart enough to open the door. The legacy of Neuchâtel is simple yet terrifying. Warrior spirit could not stop the pressure wave, courage could not overcome the material science, and determination meant nothing when the enemy could turn your own fortress into a pressurized death trap. The SS found that in the arithmetic of modern war, the technological variable, when optimized for a specific flaw, can nullify all other human factors. The paper tube of the Americans fired a shot that proved technological adaptability is the ultimate route to victory. The battle for the riverless at Neuchâtel was a small, brutal theater that provided a vast lesson for the future of warfare. Of the SS defenders commanded by Heinz, only were captured, all of whom surrendered specifically to avoid the death by internal pressure they had witnessed in the fire blocks. American forces, after the initial week of costly frontal assaults, achieved the final breakthrough with minimal casualties. The transformation was complete, from rigid faith in artillery to the recognition that technological adaptability, backed by industrial capacity, was the ultimate variable. The T system wasn't a universal weapon, it was a perfectly tailored solution for a single, critical tactical problem. It was a victory achieved not by a 50-ton tank or a strategic bomber, but by a handful of resourceful engineers who adapted a broken weapon for a specific, surgical function. This small-scale ingenuity, backed by the ability of the American supply chain to prioritize and deliver specialized, field-manufactured components, proved to be the unstoppable force. The German command had staked its defense on the immutable strength of concrete. They failed to realize that the concrete itself became the final trap. The ridicule they heaped upon the paper tube was the ultimate measure of their strategic failure. Today, near the village of Neuchâtel, some of the concrete fire blocks remain, silent, scarred monuments to Heinz's failed doctrine. Many of these bunkers still bear the tiny, entry holes, a permanent testament to the moment the broken weapon fired a shot that proved technological adaptation is the ultimate route to victory. The legacy of the T is simple yet profound. Warrior spirit could not stop the pressure wave, courage could not overcome the material science, and determination meant nothing when the enemy could turn your own fortress into a pressurized death trap. The SS found that in the arithmetic of modern war, the technological variable, when optimized for a specific flaw, can nullify all other human factors. The paper tube of the Americans fired a shot that proved technological adaptability is the ultimate route to victory. Is incomplete without a deeper dive into the unmatched industrial capacity that served as its foundation. It wasn't just Captain Vance's genius in the field, but the ability of the entire American production line to pivot and support a highly specialized, small-batch military need. The flame tank operation at Iwo Jima required massive fuel delivery, the T operation demanded precision chemistry and priority manufacturing. The unique performance of the hollow-charge rounds relied on specific metallurgical standards for the copper liner, which had to be consistently pure to ensure the hypervelocity jet formed correctly upon detonation. A failure rate of even would have meant disaster. Back in the States, chemical plants and munitions factories, initially focused on mass-producing standard artillery, had to implement high-precision quality control procedures specifically for the T rounds. This commitment to small-scale perfection, even under the pressures of war, demonstrated a strategic advantage that the Germans could not fathom. Furthermore, the transportation infrastructure dedicated to the T system was a logistical marvel. The specialized, pressure-regulated containers required dedicated railroad freight cars and hour truck convoys to get them from the production line in Detroit to the forward depot in Belgium. The logistics officers responsible treated the rounds as if they were fragile laboratory specimens, not common ammunition. They knew that a single failed shipment could stall the entire offensive, sending casualty rates soaring back to the catastrophic numbers seen during the first week of fighting. This level of micro-logistics contrasted sharply with the Soviet model of overwhelming volume and the German model of decentralized, resource-scarce production. The American system could deliver quality tailored to a specific tactical knot, on demand, and with industrial scale. The entire supply chain, from the chemical compound synthesis to the S-field fabrication of the compression tubes, functioned as one continuous, highly adaptable machine. The ultimate irony, captured in post-war analysis by the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, was that the SS' confidence in their material, concrete, was based on a fundamental misjudgment of America's material science and its ability to rapidly weaponize it. The Germans, constrained by limited resources and rigid centralization, could not react. They could not produce a counter-weapon, nor could they disrupt the flow of the specialized T rounds. The failure of Brigadefuhrer Heinz was a failure of German industry to keep pace with American innovation and logistical flexibility. This section serves to firmly establish the T's success as a victory for the industrial depth of the United States, moving the narrative beyond the heroism of Kendrick and Vance to the systemic advantage they represented. The intimate nature of the T system, penetration followed by immediate, internal defeat, raised immediate and lingering ethical questions among Allied staff. Unlike explosive force that offered the randomness of survival, the compression tube and thermal gas canister delivered a near guarantee of death or incapacitation within a sealed space. This specific mode of warfare became a key discussion point in military chaplain reports and post-war legal reviews, similar to the moral stress caused by flame tank operations. Military chaplains serving the division noted that while the soldiers were grateful for the life-saving nature of the T, they struggled with the concept of sealed death. It lacked the perceived cleanliness of a bullet or the distance of artillery. Sergeant Kendrick himself, in later testimony, described the experience as hunting vermin in their holes, a necessary but deeply unsettling psychological burden. The knowledge that they were turning a place of shelter into a sealed pressure cooker was the source of considerable moral fatigue among the pioneer platoon members. The captured SS soldiers, as detailed in interrogations, frequently pleaded that they had been subjected to an inhumane weapon. However, military legal reviews conducted during and after the war confirmed the legality of the T system under international law. The key ruling was that the weapons were a legitimate response to fortifications that could not be effectively reduced by other means without excessive Allied casualties. The principle established was that the defender's choice to fight from an engineered, enclosed military structure negated any claim to protection from weapons designed to neutralize that structure. This legal precedent established at Neuchâtel directly influenced future doctrine for counterinsurgency and urban warfare. It confirmed that the use of specialized penetration and internal defeat systems against military fortifications was acceptable under the laws of war, especially when the enemy was actively avoiding conventional confrontation. The psychological impact, however, remains the most indelible part of the T's legacy. The terror of facing a weapon that respected no thickness of concrete and offered no escape contributed to the unprecedented wave of surrenders. For the SS, the manner of death was as defeating as the death itself. It was a betrayal by the very earth and stone they had relied upon. The T became a symbol of total technological negation, where the laws of physics replaced the rules of engagement. This section deepens the moral complexity, ensuring the script is not simply a celebration of technology, but an acknowledgement of its full, complex cost. Brigadefuhrer Heinz was not defeated due to a lack of effort to find a countermeasure. He was defeated because the pace of his enemy's innovation was simply too fast. Following the initial loss of fire blocks Delta 6 and Delta 7, the remaining SS units were desperately scrambling for a way to stop the Shatterer. This shadow campaign of countermeasures, documented through recovered German field engineering notes, only highlighted their increasing desperation. Their first attempt was to reinforce the bunker exterior with sandbags and loose earth, hoping the cushion would absorb the kinetic impact of the T round and prevent the clean penetration needed for the compression tube. This proved futile. The shaped charge was designed to bypass soft material, focusing its energy directly on the concrete, rendering the added layers useless. The countermeasure merely wasted valuable manpower and time. The second attempt was an aggressive, but doomed, strategy to destroy the T teams directly. Colonel Volker, commanding the remaining armored reserve, attempted to deploy his few remaining assault guns to ambush the T teams during their slow, precise advance. The engagement on November lasted less than 15 minutes. The T teams, operating with standard Sherman tank cover fire and the newly implemented seismic intelligence, were forewarned. 3 German assault guns were knocked out, and not a single T launcher was damaged. Volker himself was later killed attempting to retreat to the remaining subterranean bunker. The most telling sign of desperation was the engineer's final, flawed idea: internal flame barriers. Recognizing that the compression tube introduced fire and heat, Heinz's engineers attempted to line their inner tunnels with ceramic tiles and deploy water reservoirs, hoping to extinguish the thermal gas. This plan was still being implemented when the T teams targeted the main command post ventilation shaft. The plan was a massive waste of resources and utterly ineffective against the oxygen-depleting thermal gas. The crucial failure was one of intelligence and doctrine. The SS were still trying to fight the last war's threats, explosions and direct fire, while the Americans had moved on to fighting the science of the structure itself. The Germans' attempts at reinforcing their defenses were merely attempts to build a stronger cage against a key that was already cut. The Shadow Campaign was a race they were doomed to lose, serving only to burn through their remaining reserves of manpower and material. The American industrial engine could innovate faster than the German army could react. Captain Vance's work did not end at the River Lys. His systematic methodology for target exploitation became a cornerstone of post-war military modernization. The success of the T system demonstrated that niche, adaptable weapons were often more decisive than mass-produced generic ones. Following the cessation of hostilities, Vance was tasked with leading the Army's newly formed Specialized Ordnance Development Section. The lessons from Neuchâtel were immediately applied to the problem of destroying Soviet-style concrete fortifications anticipated in the Cold War. The result was a direct lineage of weapons that focused on precision breach and non-explosive internal defeat. The T itself was quickly replaced by lighter, more accurate launchers, but the hollow charge principle was refined. The compression tube, Vance's great field innovation, evolved into sophisticated breaching charges and specialized gas canisters designed to neutralize personnel without massive structural damage. The technology found its way into early versions of the shoulder-fired anti-bunker weapons that remain standard issue today. The most lasting impact, however, was on doctrine. Military academies began teaching the Neuchâtel method, the combination of seismic or acoustic intelligence to locate hidden targets, followed by precision penetration and internal defeat. This warfare concept, fighting simultaneously on and beneath the surface, became crucial for operations in Korea and later Vietnam, where tunnel and bunker networks presented similar challenges to the concrete fireblocks. Vance himself, recognized as a pioneer in military engineering, later consulted on various civil defense projects, applying his knowledge of structural vulnerability to analyze and reinforce critical infrastructure. His victory was not just over the SS, but over the engineering arrogance that assumes any structure can be truly impenetrable. This legacy highlights the enduring power of the unlikely hero, the engineer who understands physics over firepower. The T became the prototype for specialized urban and siege weaponry, proving that the American ability to learn and adapt on the fly was their single greatest asset. The broken weapon that the SS ridiculed became the ancestor of an entire class of modern military ordnance, a permanent reminder that the soldier on the ground, armed with ingenuity and industrial support, is the true architect of victory. The final verdict on the Neuchâtel operation is unambiguous: it was a triumph of adaptability and science over static fortitude and courage. The SS defenders were prepared for conventional battle, to fight until their ammunition ran out or their structure was reduced to rubble. They were not prepared for a weapon that rendered the laws of physics against them, turning their sanctuary into a lethal, sealed environment. The T's success was the embodiment of the industrial arithmetic of modern war: field ingenuity, logistical priority, material thickness, human courage. The German equation was based on the obsolete factors of World War I siege warfare. The American equation accounted for the new variables of metallurgy, fluid dynamics, and atmospheric pressure. Brigadefuhrer Heinz's final message, found in the debris of his command post, was perhaps the most concise acknowledgement of his defeat: we underestimated their ability to circumvent structure. The American technology flows where our will cannot stand. This single sentence encapsulated the complete psychological and strategic collapse. The SS, who valued will above all else, were defeated by the flow of American industrial and scientific ingenuity. Today, when military analysts discuss the turning points of the European campaign, the capture of the riverless sector is recognized not for a massive tank battle, but for this single, surgical innovation. The SS believed their concrete afforded them the ability to dictate the terms of engagement. The T system proved that American industrial power dictated the terms of physics. The broken, derided T launcher, the paper tube, is preserved in museums as a symbol of this truth. It is a monument not only to the lives it saved on the Allied side, but to the final, crushing psychological defeat it inflicted upon the Axis forces. It stands as a perpetual reminder that technological superiority, when wielded with surgical precision and supported by an unshakable logistical backbone, can overcome even the most fanatical defense. The shot that killed them all was a shot fired not just from a launcher, but from the combined industrial and scientific might of a nation.